Hello, hello. Alrighty. Back on for a quickie. Listening to Celeste like a good human being. Alrighty. So earlier today we had spent a considerable amount of time changing over to using a different method of setting up the OpenGL context in Windows, which was critical for a couple of reasons. First, because it allows me to specify a target OpenGL version, but mostly because I wanted to use RenderDoc really bad. And towards the end of the stream, I started to look at the problem that I really wanted to address. I didn't get very far, and so I stopped. And then I kind of had a revelation, and I came back a little bit ago and fixed the problem. So what I wanted RenderDoc for so bad was to figure out what was going on with my Framebuffer API, because for one reason or another, it was not showing correctly in the editor when I pushed a Framebuffer on the stack, and then I directly resized it. That is fixed now, so I've got resizing and everything working correctly inside of here without having to completely destroy and recreate the Framebuffer, which is nice. In particular, it's nice because I don't have to have a special case in place for the Framebuffers that I create inside of the editor, because I wanted there to be guards against game code that created Framebuffers that failed to delete them, or that tried to delete too many. So if they tried to pop more Framebuffers from the Framebuffer stack than they had pushed, that's a sure sign of a bad time. And also I didn't want that to break the game view of Enterprise. I wanted that to be something that was a problem for your game code, but not a problem for the game engine, in other words. So I tracked down the problem. I had realized that the issue had arisen from a viewport size of 0. And this is this here, when I click close on quit, that's its own thing that we're going to address sooner or later. I actually kind of have a good idea about what's causing that problem. And that's part of the category of problems that we're trying to fix as we approach the build system. When we get to the point where we can actually start generating projects from the editor. But yeah, the problem was that I had an interesting idea for how buffer sizes should be. And the idea was that if you specify a width or a height of 0, then you are specifying a frame buffer that should be the size of whatever the default frame buffer is. And that's good idea in theory, but I wasn't implementing it. When I went to resize Framebuffers, I was forgetting to do this part. I was checking to make sure that the width and the height changed before I went to resize, because I didn't want to execute a whole bunch of code on OpenGL's side for resizing a Framebuffer that actually the game code was just saying was the same size. But I forgot to actually tell my engine that the Framebuffer widths and heights had changed. And what that led to was that you would push a Framebuffer onto the stack, and then you would pop it. So when you go to push the Framebuffer onto the stack, it would have the size that you assign it. You go to resize it. We didn't update the size here. And then when we went to pop the Framebuffer the next time, we didn't have a width or height to fall back onto, so we defaulted to 0. So yeah, that's fixed up now. But it kind of raised up another thing that I need to get working, and I think that now is the perfect time to address it, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it now. And that is actually getting resizing to work correctly for window resizing. So that way, if you want to have a frame buffer that adjusts its width or height with the window, it will. So this is not an editor thing. This is actually specifically for the standalone game, because inside of the editor, your game code will never render directly to the default frame buffer. It will only ever render to the frame buffer that captures the game view. But the idea is that, like, if you go to resize the window, like, see what just happened? I went to make it bigger, and it didn't actually adjust the viewport size. It just made it bigger. Interestingly, it fills up because jail clear will fill this entire frame buffer, or this entire default frame buffer, and the default frame buffer does resize automatically. But I want any frame buffer that I render to automatically update correctly. So there's a few elements to that. And the first, if I can remember where I put it. The first actually is in the window file. That's right. Did I skip it? No. Well, the first that I was going to say was we were going to respond to resize events, but I think I may have accidentally gotten rid of that. Oh, here we go. To do force any frame buffers with a 0 dimension to resize. So inside of the window initialization code, so this is something that runs once when the game is run by itself as a standalone exe, or run through the launcher application. We'll subscribe to a new event type called window resize. And this is going to be sent, and I think I actually already set up the code hooks. Did I? Sometimes I think about doing something and I don't actually do it. All right, here we go. Yeah, so I added a, you can see with the green line here that this is new code. I added a new event handler to the window procedure. So from here, where we normally handle things like the mouse moving over the window or receiving raw input from the keyboard and mouse, I added a WM sizing handler, which is the message that's fired whenever you adjust the size of the window by clicking and dragging on the borders. Admittedly, there won't be a lot of games that will utilize this because almost always you're going to be setting it to a fixed dimension, and you'll like pick the resolution you want from a list because you want those things to work in full screen, and there's only like a specific handful of full screen resolutions that your graphics driver will probably support. And then you want those to carry over to the windowed mode if you're going to use windowed mode. So normally you're not clicking and dragging the border on a game, but you know, if you want your game to do that, you know, that's not really a problem. And for the sake of development, like for my sake, as I'm working with the engine, getting it up and running, I'm going to probably want to be able to resize these windows. So in the case of the resizing event, we get the client rectangle. The Windows sizing event does actually come in with the size of the window that you go to drag, but that's different from the client area. That's the area that you're supposed to actually render to. So instead of getting it from the, I think it's the L param of the window procedure call, I'm getting it by polling the client rectangle. I then make a STD pair of 2 ints. Called it new size, made it just the right edge minus the left edge and the bottom minus the top, so you get the dimensions. And then I forward that to the window resize event. So if we head back to the handler, which was here, we're going to get a size from it. So we're actually going to use my API for this. So we're going to say events unpack. This is a templated function. Basically, you tell it the type of data that is in the event, and it will extract that. And there's error checking in there to make sure that you're not trying to extract something that's not the correct type. But I think this is a fairly elegant way to handle this. So we do an std pair of int and int, and then we tell it the event. We pass in the event, which is a parameter of the event callback. And now, being that this is a tuple, what I can do is I can actually use C++17's structured bindings to get the values. So we'll use auto by reference, and we'll call the left one width because that's what it is, and the right one height. And that way we'll assign the values of the event. I'm actually pretty proud of this API. It took me a couple iterations to figure out exactly how to make this really easy. But just like, you get an event handler that's always the same. You get a reference to an event, and then you just tell it what data type it is to get the data out. In an ideal world, it would tell you what type it is, but this is pretty close to ideal. All right. So we got the width and the height, and then I've been thinking about how we should handle these events. We basically need to invoke framebuffer resize framebuffer. Oh, but that's part of the graphics API, and I'm in the window code. We basically need to invoke resize framebuffer on any frame buffers that have a 0 width or 0 height, because even though they're represented as 0 width and 0 height in the engine side, because the value of 0 means that you want it to be the width of the default frame buffer, the window. You actually have to allocate the correct amount of memory, obviously, so that's got to happen here. And now that I'm thinking about it, this handler should probably not be in the window code. It should probably be in the framebuffers.cpp. So I just cut it out of there. We're going down to init framebuffers, and we will add the event handler. And I'm doing it as a lambda because this is, fairly straightforward code. Probably a very small function by the time we're done. Anyway, so if we do resize framebuffer, and we are now in the scope of init framebuffers, so we don't need to justify it with the class scope. Now we basically need to tell every single frame buffer that's been created to resize to the size of the window if they support it. So let me comment that out so that way I don't get compilation errors. And then I'm going to start by heading up to the top where we keep all of our globals, and I'm going to add some information. So we got frame buffer handles, frame buffers created during editor play, since editor play. So underneath the frame buffer handles, I'm going to make a static std. I'm gonna make this one a vector, and we'll do a static vector of frame buffer handles, which we have an alias for the sake of making this file easier to read, because otherwise you'd see this all over the place. A vector frame buffer handles, and this will be what should I call it? We'll call it FBs linked to resize, I guess, or linked to default. No, linked to resize. Yeah, that's a little bit more clear. So the idea here is that whenever we go to push a frame buffer onto, sorry, not when we go to push, when we go to create a frame buffer, if one of the dimensions is 0, we will add it to this list. And if you call resize on that frame buffer, and you resize to a dimension of 0, we'll also add it to that list. And vice versa, if you resize and you don't have zeros at the end of it, then it'll remove from that list. So let's do that. Let's go to create frame buffer, and then down below, where should I put this? There's a number of points of failure that could happen during the frame buffer. So we actually have to, like, for example, we check the frame buffer for completeness before we move on. So here we go. At the very, very end, we will, once we have this straightened out, down here where we go to bind, and we set the width, height, and attachments, we will add to FBs linked to resize if there's a size 0. Is there another place where I'm checking width and height? Let me find out. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so where we were in the code, then we will do an if statement. If width equals 0 or height equals 0, we will make a block because we're not monsters. And then we will do FBs linked to resize dot pushback. And we'll push back the return val, which in this case is the frame buffer handle, I believe. Yeah. Okay. And then down here, this is the check where we see whether or not we're in play mode. Because if we are, then we want to track that it was created during play mode for the sake of cleaning up after it when play mode ends. So I think that's good. Now let's add some code to the resize method, resize frame buffer. Take another sip of my lager. Whoa. Down the wrong pipe. But yeah, when we go to resize, there's also the chance that you would change the state. So if you were to go from a 0 width, 0 height to a fixed size, then we need to remove it from that list. Admittedly, there's not a lot of situations where that might be a thing, but let's be thorough here. And actually, now that I'm saying that, the idea that you would randomly insert or remove handles actually doesn't lend itself well to a vector. Because a vector is, obviously it's basically just an array. And if you need to remove and add elements willy-nilly, then that kind of sucks. So let's do, instead of a vector, let's do an STD set. A set is kind of like a map if the keys don't have any values associated with them. So you can push in a unique value, and there's only ever one. And it's also, I believe, O log n time in the worst case to access. And in the best case, it's O1 time to check whether the key's in there. So instead of doing the pushback, like we were doing, we will do this, I think. It's either that or we do dot in place. I haven't used sets in a little bit. Yeah, it looks like that's going to be insert or in place. So we'll do insert in this case. Though I'm not seeing any complaints from IntelliSense quite yet. I think IntelliSense is probably just lagging a little bit. So we'll do .insert, then we'll pass in the framebuffer handle. All right, and then back down to where we were in the resize code, resize framebuffer. Now we have a way to rapidly check whether or not it's in that list. And if it is, then we can respond appropriately. So if the frame buffer width and height has changed, we set the frame buffer width and height inside of these arrays, so that way when we go to push and pop, it will correctly identify the width and the height. And at this point we would say if width equals 0 or height equals 0, we would, and then, yeah, I'll do braces for the second. We will do FB's linked to resize dot insert FB, which is the parameter that we're passing in for the frame buffer we want to resize. And then I'll say else FB's linked to resize dot erase FB. And I believe if you tried to do a duplicate insertion, there's no problem. Yeah, it's inserts elements into container if the container doesn't already contain a element with an equivalent key. And then with erase, we I think that it's not going to throw an error if there's a problem. Removes the element at pause. Okay, we're looking for version 3. Removes the element if one exists with a key equivalent to key. So if it doesn't exist, then it doesn't do it. That's my read of this. Which is perfect, because that makes this code pretty clean and simple. Simple and clean, if you will. And I'm not usually a huge fan of doing if line, else line, but this is a pretty short little block. It's pretty clear to read. Cool. And now we have a system where when you go to create the frame buffer, if you have a width 0 or a height 0, it will mark it to resize with the window. Otherwise, if you resize a frame buffer from code and you set its width or height to 0 to deliberately link it to the resize, we add it to that list. Perfect. Now the last thing to do is to actually invoke resize frame buffer on it. And we need to do that down where we were doing the event handler. So that's down here in init. We've got the lambda going. So we've obtained the width and the height that the new window is going to be. Ooh, that's So in this lambda, we're going to actually need to check which one is 0, which width or height is 0. So let's do the for loop. So we'll do for it'll be a const fbh reference. I guess I'll use FB again. For every frame buffer in FB's linked to resize, we'll need to check whether we'll need to check which width or height needs to change. So I guess I'll use a ternary expression for this. So we'll say resize frame buffer. We'll call it on that frame buffer. And the width will be, I guess it'll be FB widths, right? Or widths. Pretty sure there's a array. Yeah, here. FB widths. Oh, it's graphics FB widths. Yeah, that should be accessible. Is it not accessible for some reason? IntelliSense wasn't suggesting it. So we'll say FB widths for the FB question mark. So if it's 0, then we specify the width that came from the event. Otherwise, ooh, hang on. Oh, that's a good one. Hang on. Let's review how we do resize. So it's occurring to me now that I don't have a way to both tell resize frame buffer what width or height to set based on the window size, yet still keep the state that FB widths equals 0. So we're going to need to approach this a little differently. We'll still need to track whether we set 0 to the width or height. So all the code we just wrote is still good. But down here, instead of doing this, we'll need to somehow, we'll need to set the state for the width and the height. So I believe there is a variable inside of graphics.h. Yeah, FB, no, that's not it. There's a window width and window height that I'm looking for. Oh, that would be in window.h, that's right. Yeah, so window.h has a static window width, window height, and aspect ratio. And we can access those with getWidth. So what we could do... Oh, you know what? I was right the first time. The event handler doesn't need to be in here. It needs to be inside of the init function for window init. And then from window init, we subscribe to the width and the height changes to the window. And that gives us access to the width and the height variables. It also gives us access to the set width. Or I thought there was a setter. Yeah, there's set width, set height. So we got set width, and we can set to width. Oops, width. Like so, and you guessed it, set height. If I can spell it right. Set height to height. And I believe these are both set up to automatically update the aspect ratio, so that's good. In the future, I may just change that to be like a set dimensions, which would make a lot of sense. Actually, that's really easy to do, so let me just do that now. So we got set width, set height, and we will do one right above, void window set size, and this will take I'll do a float width and a float height. Instead of doing like a GLM vector, for example. So we'll do set size, we'll do window width equals width, and then window height equals height, and then aspect ratio equals blah 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 blah. We check to see whether window height is non-zero. If it is, then we do width over height. Otherwise, we do 1, and that's square. And that's just to avoid the case of a divide by 0 operation if for some reason we're setting the window size to be 0 height. There we go. And that's looking good, actually. However, we also need to do a platform version of this. So first thing I'm doing is I'm putting a return guard here, so we'll return early if we are in editor mode, which is what we did in these other methods. And then we have set, where we would do set width and set height platform, we're going to do set size platform. We'll pass in width and height. Cool. Now let's go ahead and actually add this declaration, this prototype to window.h. Up here. Static void set size. And we'll need the set size platform as well. And now that I'm looking at it, what the hell are these doing in the public space? This was obviously a mistake. Let's put those down in the private section. Yeah, down below here. Because you don't want this to be exposed to your game code. You want this to be only exposed to this class, basically. Because basically set size, set width, set height, and all the rest of it, that's going to happen in a platform generic way, and then inside of that code, inside of here, we call the platform specific way. And now we got to implement this on Window 132.cpp for the engine. Oh, except for I don't think we've actually done anything with it yet. Hang on. So set width platform, set height platform, their purpose is to actually do the resizing of the window, because that's a platform specific thing. You gotta, for example, in full screen mode, you gotta tell it to change the resolution, and in windowed mode, you gotta actually adjust the window size. So these are very important prototypes to have. I just haven't implemented them yet. We'll get there eventually. But we're going to do set size platform. We'll do float width and float height, like so. And like before, we'll do absolutely nothing. We will say, please implement me later, and thank you, and move on. Cool. And then if I go back to Windows CPP, that is looking savvy. And this has the added advantage that we're not calculating the aspect ratio twice. So if I go back to where we were, which was where? It was down here on the init. Yeah, here. So instead of set width and set height, we just do set size, and we pass in both width and the height. Okay, that was painless. Cool. So when the window receives the window resize event from dragging the window resize border, it will call set size on the window. That will update the width and height and the aspect ratio, and then actually handle resize on... Oh, hang on. Yeah, we actually don't want to do it this way. I do want set size, but what I don't want to do is invoke set size in the event handler. Instead of that, we will directly set these values. Because if we were to invoke resize from a Windows resize event, what would happen is we would be clicking and dragging the border. That would emit the window resize event, and then we would tell the engine code to also change the size of the window, and that's not what we wanted to do. All we wanted to do was update these values. Cool. Boop. And that should be good enough. Let's close out of there. And there. There we go, and we'll leave this as it was. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we forgot to do the implementation on the Mac OS layer. And I think I said this before, that I don't really like doing any programming on the Mac side while I'm on my Windows machine, but this is dead simple. That set size, platform, float width, float height, and then to do implement. So that won't give me any trouble when I go to build on Mac next time. Perfect. Good. All right. Now back on the frame buffer side, when we initialize the frame buffers, we set the default frame buffer to 0, 0 on that. We also need to tell it. No, this is actually an exception. I was going to say that we need to tell the engine that the default frame buffer is linked to window size, but it's a default frame buffer. It already is. So we'll skip over that. So we'll go to resize frame buffer. Talking about assigning a size to the default frame buffer just made me realize I should probably have an assertion here, ep assert that fb is not equal to 0, because that would make it the default frame buffer. And let's put a helpful error message in there as well. We'll say attempted to resize default frame buffer. Yeah. This probably should be a warning, but I don't have those working quite yet, so I'm going to leave that and then deal with it later. Just checking my levels real quick. Okay, so now we've linked the resize events to the actual reported window size. Now we have that data available when we go to resize the frame buffers. So let's head back down to While it is true I don't actually need the width and the height from the event to tell me what size to adjust these to, I do still need to trigger the resize event for every single frame buffer that has a 0 width or 0 height. So let's go back to window.cpp. That's the editor one, and the engine one. There we go. Where's the init? Oh, the init is platform specific. So window win32.cpp, and here's the event. So whenever this triggers, we still do need to tell the frame buffer that we still need to tell the graphic system to resize all appropriate frame buffers. So there's a couple of ways we could do this. One would be to directly notify the graphic system from here. That would require a private API call in the graphics system, because I don't want to expose such functionality to game developers. However, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ahead and also handle the event inside of Framebuffers, and I'll just return false instead of true. Because this is going to be initialized after the window is. We go to init Framebuffers. We will say, let's subscribe to window resize events. And then we don't actually care what size comes back. All we care about is that we know a resize had happened or is happening. So what we'll do is we will say, from here, we'll just say, we'll resize every single frame buffer inside of that list. So we'll go for every, it doesn't need to be a const reference, but we'll say, const reference. Const frame buffer handle reference FB in FB's linked to resize, so everything that needs to be resized. We will invoke resize frame buffer with the FB, and then we need to know whether or not to pass a 0 width or 0 height. So the rule here is that we're going to be passing in exactly what it already has. So for the width and the height, we actually get that from FB widths, right? Widths. That's in here. I know that it is. Yeah, it's here. FB widths. It's just that IntelliSense wasn't populating with it for some reason. FB widths and then FB heights. And these, okay, there we go. And these are basically maps that associate the frame buffer handle with the width or the height of it. So we pass in what it originally had. If that's a 0, that's the thing that's going to be redimensioned. Cool, and I think that's that for that code. Because if we, hang on a second, FB widths, just a quick gut check. Here we go, in the resize, FB widths, yeah, because in any situation where we do a resize from code, resize frame buffers, and we actually assign a 0 width or height, that's going to be stored inside of FB widths, and we're going to use we're going to add or remove from the link to resize list anyway. So perfect. I think that's that. Okay, we got a error somewhere. What do we got? No matching call for subscribe. Events, subscribe. Oh, I forgot to return on this one. So this is a Lambda, but basically this is a stand-in for an event callback. The event callback will return true when handled and false when not. So I'm going to return false in this situation because I want this event to continue to propagate and then hit the window layer. Oh, hang on. Yeah, there's a problem with this scenario, and I just realized that these event callbacks are going to be backwards. This is registered first, this is registered second. So what's going to happen is that when you go to drag the window resize, it'll come in here and then tell the frame buffers that it needs to resize to whatever, you know, the new size is, except for it's not passing the new size, it's passing the old size. All right. That's a problem. Because I need this code to run first and then this code to run second. So I guess I will have to do the crude way, which is to add a private graphics method that will go ahead and refresh these sizes. So I'll just add the body here, void graphics. I'll call it I guess resize variable width variable width FBs, and then this will, as long as I use the curly braces, this will execute this code. Simple enough. It just loops through all the frame buffers linked to resize, and then resizes them using the same numbers that we had passed in. And then I can get rid of this subscription outright, like that. And then this I need to declare in graphics.h in the private section. So we got the init shaders and all the inits. Got the pre-draws, all the editor play cleanups, then all the cleanups. This is going to go above all of those. And I'll put it in here, the frame buffer stuff. Yeah. And we'll say static copy paste. Static void resize variable with FBs. And now that it's here and it's declared, that should be available for use in enterprise level stuff. So if we go to the window resize event, after we've updated these variables, we can call resize variable with FBs in the graphics system. And I'm pretty sure they're friends, so it should have access to it. Or maybe not, maybe it doesn't. Function, hang on a second. Function is inaccessible. Okay, yeah, so I guess I need to... This is like the one design flaw with this organization system I've got, is that I have to, on the engine side, I have to do friends all over the place. And it's starting to get out of hand. If we go to window.h, not that one, that one, and we go to friends, we would say friend class graphics. Cool. Wait, no, it's the other way around. It needs to be the friend class that needs to friend the window class. So let's go to graphics.h, where we just were, and we'll say friend class window, like that. And now the window class should have access to the private members of graphics, and it can directly say, hey, I just updated the width and the height and the aspect ratio. Let's update all of the frame buffers that care about that. All right, F7. Gosh, I love this music. Celeste was just such a good game. I'm almost annoyed that I don't have the dexterity to actually 100% the game. I really wanted to. It's so fun. It's such an accomplishment to actually beat a level. I got pretty far. I got to the seasides. I got stuck on the seaside for the final story level. And then I decided to move on with my life. There we go. Okay, so there was 64 objects that needed to be updated, but that seems to be working. Cool. All right. So something weird just happened. I went to resize it, and everything got narrower. You see that? If I go to make it a little bit bigger, the text here on the corner and Madeline and the text in the middle, it actually squishes in a little bit. The aspect ratio is backwards or something. Okay. That's not what I expected. What did I mess up? Interestingly, the top right-hand corner remains in the same place, but I think that's a coincidence. Huh. Let's take a look at the sizing event again. That was in window 132. Here. Okay, so let's follow the logic through. So WM sizing triggers every time you move like a pixel while clicking and dragging on the border. We give the client rectangle. We get the width and the height by subtracting the right by the left and the bottom by the top, because it's the origin's on the top left corner. And then we dispatch the window resize event, which let's look up where. Yeah, that's only used here, where we dispatch the event, and here where we subscribe. Wait, sorry, other way around. Here where we subscribe. And in the subscription, we take the width and the height from the tuple. We assign it to the window width height, and so on. We set the aspect ratio as well. Then we resize the variable with Framebuffers. I think the problem arises with the fact that we are using the default frame buffer. But why would that matter? I think if you resize the window, it's supposed to resize the default frame buffer, like automatically. Right? Maybe if I take a look at... Huh. I'm going to set a breakpoint here and just kind of step through the logic. Continue. That was weird. It did a window resize event before I did anything. Perhaps it's the Windows thing and it just does a resizing anyway. So I'm clicking and holding and then I'm dragging to the right. We've got the first event. We'll step into it. Oops. Step over. And so the width is... Oh, it's on the side here. So we've got a height of 720, width of 1280. That's interesting because it's not any different than the way it was before I started dragging. So perhaps I need to drag it more before it'll get there. I'm gonna hit continue and then just do it again and confirm that it's actually resizing. What's happening? Huh, I think I accidentally stepped out. Okay, back into the event. I have to say step in. Oh, I have to say step in because this is a lambda, and if I don't step in, then it's not actually going to enter the function call. Okay, that makes sense. All right, and we got the width and the height again. Yeah, so now we've increased the width by 2 pixels. That makes sense. But yeah, the width and the height seems to be moving in the right direction. The aspect ratio is not showing up on the locals though, so what's the aspect ratio? Identifier aspect ratio is undefined? That doesn't make sense. It's right there. We just defined it. We just set the value. All right. Maybe I have to do a window aspect ratio. Identifier window is undefined. Okay, there we go. EP window aspect ratio was apparently required. Maybe it's because I'm in the scope of the lambda. Actually, yeah, that makes sense. Width and height were declared here. Window width, window height, and aspect ratio are scoped outside of the lambda. So yeah, so 1.78, yeah, that makes sense. And then let's step into resize variable widths. We just go into here. We don't have any that are linked to resize, so we don't even bother. Okay. So let's stop for a second. Why would any of my code adjust the aspect ratio? Like, I'm pretty certain this wasn't an issue originally. Yeah, I'm like 100% sure that this squishing thing wasn't happening before. All right. Well, we kind of got task 1 done, so I'm gonna go ahead and take a quick break. I'll be back in like 5 minutes or so. We're not gonna be on here too much longer. It's getting a little late. Alrighty. I'm back. Alright, I just took a quick break. My sister showed me some videos from CNN on New Year's Eve last year that involved Anderson Cooper drinking heavily and almost everyone else drinking heavily and continuing to work on live television. And it was... I'm gonna have to go and sit through and rewatch that whole thing because holy shit. Alright. So where we left off, we had the resize frame buffers set up so that way if you create a frame buffer that adjusts with the width and the height of the window, it's supposed to work. It's supposed to automatically resize when the window does. However, you get this weird thing going on, and I don't know why it would start now. But when I go to resize the game window, not only does the frame buffer, with the default frame buffer, not appear to resize, but it also appears to be squishing and stretching, which I don't get. So just as a gut check, I'm going to go back to the window code where we invoke the resize. I'm going to comment that out and rebuild and rerun. I'm going to quickly confirm that that event has nothing to do with it. That event has something to do with it. That's so strange. So what I just did is I commented out the window resize event that we were dispatching from the sizing event. And for one reason or another, the code we just added was introducing this squishing and stretching of the numbers. You can see on the top right corner here that the text and everything else remains identically sized. But then when I uncomment, something in the code we just wrote has a side effect of squishing and stretching the default frame buffer. Alright, so here we are again. I go to resize to make it bigger, and the things get smaller. And what? And then I'm presuming that everything's getting. Look at Mr. Knight here. Everything, he's getting like really wide. He's been chunking out, and he gets smaller when I go wider than the width. Why would that matter? That is interesting. Let's go back to the subscribe. Okay, so the first thing we're doing is we're unpacking the new width and height. We're setting the window width and height. Oh, you know what? I think I know what's going on here. So what I think is going on is that when we let go of the mouse, we are still operating at the window size. Oh, that's confusing. Okay, I think what's happening is that the WM sizing event is not reporting the final size of the window. I think it's only reporting the intermediate sizes. And so when we let go of the mouse, the final size that the window winds up at doesn't get used. So I guess because I'm not using the parameters of the event anyway, it doesn't actually matter which event I use. I could use WM size. I could also use WM exit sizing. Exit size move. I think I'm going to use exit size move. This is something that triggers whenever whenever you let go of the mouse button and you've just resized a window or you've just moved a window. And we'll trigger the resize event then, because at that point the client rec should be finished and yada yada yada. Let's rebuild. And rerun. Okay, same old scene that we're probably sick and tired of seeing. Yeah, we've got the same problem. What the heck? Okay. Maybe there's something wrong with the dimensions I'm getting from get client rect. That's the only other thing I can think of. Like maybe get client rect is not exactly getting the correct dimensions of the client area. But I'm not finding... another instance of it in my game code or my engine code. Let me think through the behavior that's happening here real quick. So if I make it a little bit bigger, it gets narrower. Actually, it's only the aspect ratio that's getting changed now that I'm thinking about it. Because if we look carefully on the upper right-hand corner, that edge where I have the text being based off of, that actually remains exactly where it should be. And conversely, if I make the window narrower than the default size, we see that the left edge of the one there is getting pushed to the left a little bit. So actually, I think that the issue is not here. I think the issue is with the aspect ratio calculation. That would be... yeah, that'd be in here, and aspect here. So that would be something going on this way. Window width equals width, window height equals height. If the window height is 0, then we do 1, otherwise we do window width over window height. Window width and height. Oh, okay, hang on, I think I got it. Window width and window height are being passed in as integers, and we store them as floats, so that way we can directly use them in floating point arithmetic. Dang it. Dang it. Dang it. Dang it. All right. Cool. So we're going to unpack this as a pair of floats, and now I need to go back to the dispatch, and instead of doing ints, we're going to convert those values to floats, please. All right. And if we were to rebuild now and rerun, I'm willing to bet everything will just be peachy. All right, dragging. Oh, no, it's not. It's not peachy. It is not peachy. It is plummy. It is the opposite of a peach. Actually, a plum is not the opposite of a peach. It is more like the... it's more like the Wario to the peach. Kind of opposite, but kind of the same. Okay, so that wasn't it. As I make it bigger, it still screws up. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's a little bit strange that the default window size isn't updating, or the default frame buffer isn't matching up on the edge. There must be something I'm overlooking regarding the default frame buffer. So I'm looking at the Chronos documentation real quick. Control F for size. All right. The default frame buffer contains a number of images based on how it was created. All default frame buffer images are automatically resized to the size of the output window as it is resized. Okay. In compatibility contexts or OpenGL 3.0 and below, the default frame buffer can contain a plethora, wow, what a word, a plethora of other image buffers. It contain a number of auxiliary images. These are simply off-screen color buffers, the same size as the window. They can be rendered and blended to just like any other image. Yeah, that's not related. But this would suggest that it should be filling the screen no matter what, so... So what am I missing from this picture? Why is it not resizing with the window? So this here is where we set the aspect ratio of what we saw. I basically do an orthographic projection where the left side is the width of the display divided by 2. The right side is the width of the display divided by 2. But on the positive side, and so on. So maybe there's something wrong with the value we get back from getWidth. So we just return window width, and if we go back to where we were in here, window width is being assigned here. So what gives? I'm gonna add a breakpoint here to where we push the camera with the orthographic projection. And I'm going to temporarily disable it here, so that we can just turn it on real quick. I'm going to run the application through the debugger. I'm going to induce the effect by dragging and making it a little wider, and I'm going to engage the breakpoint so we can see what we've got here. So we're pushing the camera. This is the world position of the camera. This is the rotation of the camera, which is just an identity quaternion. And we go into get height, and that is set to 7 and 20. Right, because I only adjusted the width. And then we go into get height again, because we're doing the... Actually, that's interesting. Why did it do the height before the width? I guess it's evaluating this expression from right to left. I guess it doesn't really matter. And then we go into get window width. It is saying 1670. That's good. And then 1670 again for the other side. 1670. That's interesting. Because it should be. I'm doing 720p, so that would be 1080 by 720, right? What did I say the width was? Okay. Did I continue? How big did I make the window? So I made the window rather big. I'm gonna just make it a little bit bigger than the default window. So this is like, I don't know, 100, 200 pixels. Let's engage the breakpoint again. Step over. Window get height. So we're looking at 1344 by 720, and that's 1280 by 720. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So if that's the case, the orthographic projection is correct. Step out. Step out. Yeah, I don't get it. This might be where I have to stop for the night and then open it tomorrow and then realize that the answer was obvious all along. Something I'm doing still is adjusting the aspect ratio a little bit. I just don't get what it could be. It couldn't be, like, it's realistically not going to be something wrong with GLM ortho, because that's tried and true code. I didn't write that. We confirmed that the width and the height are correct. So apparently it's not the orthographic projection that's the problem. Perhaps there's a rounding error regarding the width and the height. Like maybe we're seeing floating point errors in the division that only are apparent because we are stretching the view back from the window width and height to the original window width and height. Oh, is there a viewport thing going on? Hang on a second. I think I know what's happening. Okay. Exit size move we call window resize. Let's go to that. Down here. Window resize. We get a new width and height and stuff. We resize the variable with frame buffers. However, we probably need to reset the viewport for the resized. Okay, hang on a second. I'm going to say graphics, set viewport to be 0.0f, 1.0f, 0.0f, 1.0f. Because I use 0 to 1 scale for setting the location of the viewport. And this is kind of hacking code. This is not a general use case scenario, but I'm wondering if a failure to reset the viewport is the reason why it's not rendering correctly. Okay, that seems to have done something wrong. Something very wrong. Okay, what went wrong here? I'm rerunning with that breakpoint set. Oh, hang on. The breakpoint set, I will rerun that. Okay, resized a little bit. Let's step into the set viewport. Okay, so we have a width and a height of 0. Oh, okay, yeah. All right, so this is probably where the bug is happening. So, well, I don't know if it's the area, but it's a area that ties into this. So when we go to set the viewport size, we utilize the frame buffer widths and heights to identify where along the frame buffer dimensions the viewport's going to be set. So you set the viewport to be a proportion of whatever the frame buffer size is, and that allows you to not care about how big the frame buffer size is. It'll always be a third of the screen or a quarter of the screen or whatever, or a quarter of the texture or whatever, if you're rendering to an off-screen buffer. So what I'll do instead here, we need to do some conditionalizing. So the width and the height that we get from frame buffer widths and heights needs to actually be set from 0 to be the window width or height if it's 0. So I'm going to change these from references to values. So we'll get these as values. And then we'll say if width equals 0. I'll do this a little bit more elegantly. I'll say width equals width question mark, and then if it's non-zero, then we'll do width. If it's 0, then we'll do window get width, like that. And then we'll do the same thing for height. Like that. All right, and now suddenly when we go to set the viewport, it should be accepting the new width, height, and it'll be the size of the viewport if the if the frame buffer is resized to the dimensions of the window, to the size of the default frame buffer, in other words. Okay, fingers crossed. Here we go. That's my breakpoint again. Let me turn it off. Okay, all right. I think that's it. I think we fixed it. So now the resizing event seems to be working correctly. Except for if I maximize, because I'm not handling maximize events. But if I click and drag the borders here, it seems to be going okay. Cool, and that is great. I think that's probably a great spot to finish on. It's 9:24 where I'm at. I will, though, do a couple more things. First, I'm gonna confirm that this doesn't break something in the launcher. So the launcher should be behaving exactly the same. Yep, like so. And if I go to the editor, that should be behaving the same as well. Because the editor, we don't even handle that stuff directly. We just let IMGUI do it. Yep. Good. And when it's undocked and it's on window, it's good. Something that I want the IMGUI windows to do is that if you undock them and you drag them to the top of the window or the left or the right side, I do want them to play with the Windows compositor a little bit, so it'll like automatically maximize if you drag to the top and things like that. Or if you double click the title bar, what it does right now is it minimizes, and I don't like that. But if you double click and it maximizes, that would be great. Yeah, so that seems to be working fine. Oh, except for this other bug that's unrelated to what we dealt with right now, but we'll address when I get to cleaning up that system. Yeah, and the last thing was, if we go to the test game build again, I wanted to see if I could fix maximization. So we'll go to Window, Win32. Oh, we're already there. And we'll go to the window procedure. So we have exit size move was the event that we used to do the resize. I'm actually going to add a case above that, and we'll do a fall through case. And I think it's MDI maximize. I forget exactly. Go procedure maximize 132. I'm looking for the event to follow up on when you maximize. You know what? It looks like WM size is a better fit for WM exit size move. Let's try that out. Because this appears to explicitly handle when the window has been maximized. Okay, that's looking good. That's looking good. Okay. And if I put it on the right side, it'll still do everything perfect. All right, sweet. So I think that's a good time to stop for the night. There might be some room for improvement here. Like, for example, perhaps it would be better if while I'm dragging and resizing, it actually displays the game view. Yeah, I mean that probably won't be too hard to add, but it's not critical right now. The editor is something that you actually will be regularly resizing, and that's something I've already got working. And that works by re-invoking the entire run loop whenever you go to drag the resize. Basically, you just like tell the application to do an update as if it's a new frame. When like every frame that you drag a new window size, and it does that. And that's how that works. In the case of a game, I don't know. It's not even likely that a game will have a resizable window where you can click and drag to any arbitrary size. I'll come back to that. Another way that we might improve would be to handle on the I'll stop that. On the frame buffer resize, currently I have it just resizing the frame buffer anytime, anytime you call to resize it, it actually does the reallocation of the frame buffer textures, and that's fast. That's not like a huge overload to be resizing the frame buffer each frame, but I probably would be better off if I took the frame buffer textures and only resized in those cases where I need more memory, and then in those cases where I'm resizing to a smaller size, just keep the memory and then change the viewport so that way I'm actually only rendering to a subset of that buffer. But that's tomorrow Michael problem. For now, I am satisfied with what I've done. Thanks for joining me if you have. Have a great night.